Great. So glad to see such a wonderful audience here this evening. My name is Terry Bradley. I'm the Talented and Gifted Coordinator here at Fairview High School. And 11 different schools and organizations all came together to make this evening happen for us. And you were watching a slideshow with all of these sponsors, and I want to give a big round of applause because you are in here free tonight because of those sponsors. Thank you. I also want to thank all the student help. It's been wonderful today. The fabulous Honors Quartet, the writing committee, and we have students doing the soundboard, doing the lighting, doing all the filming. So it's really a student-run operation this evening, in addition to all of the sponsors and volunteers that stepped up to help us out. So thank you. I'm so happy to have Dr. Dan Siegel here this evening. But before I tell you a little bit about him, how many of you wish you were a teenager again? Let's see a show of hands. I want to see a show of hands. All right. Okay, well, okay, whether you raised your hand or not, I'm sure we would all agree that being a teenager, you probably think and see things differently than we do now as an adult, right? And for those of us who are working with and raising teens and adolescents, it can be challenging and it can be confusing. And so from a neurobiologist standpoint, we're so happy to have Dr. Dan Siegel here this evening to kind of unpack some of that for us and explain some of it, the challenges, and just what's going on so that we can be better in working with and in raising these wonderful kids that we're raising. So after Dan leaves Boulder tonight, he's going to be going to Denver to speak in the morning, and then he is flying off to the Netherlands and the UK, and then Finland, and then another adventure that I'm hoping he'll tell you a little bit about. So tonight we have him in Boulder, Colorado. So let's give a warm welcome to Dan Siegel.
Thank you, Terry. I want to thank all the sponsors for helping to make this event happen tonight. Can you hear me okay? Fantastic, and thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful Boulder evening. If this were California, I'd say, why aren't you at the beach? But I could say, why aren't you out in the mountains? It's really fantastic to be able to have this large amount of time to talk about adolescence. And so Terry asked how many of you would like to return to your adolescence. Let me just see how many adolescents we have in the audience. There's a handful, so you're going to help teach the experience with me as we go. Since this book Brainstorm came out, which is about adolescents and written for adolescents themselves to read, I've had the opportunity to actually teach at middle schools and high schools directly. So this could be a presentation directed toward people who are between 12 and 24, more or less, the second dozen years of life. Because it turns out adolescence does not end when you turn 20, and so the term teenage and adolescent are not the same. So that raises the question, what is adolescence? And why would middle school and high schools want someone to come and talk to adolescents about adolescence? After all, they are adolescents, they know what's going on. And the answer is that we have an incredibly new understanding of this period of time that's emerged from the science of adolescence in ways that we just didn't understand before. So since the vast majority of people in this beautiful auditorium are actually adults, then what we'll do is take an adult perspective diving into this. But as you'll see, and the adolescents in the room can watch this, how many of you who are adults once were an adolescent? Take a look around. So there you go. So we're all in this together. And for myself, the reason I ended up writing a book for adolescents themselves to read is because as a father, my two kids, a son and a daughter, were just passing through the teenage years, and I was very, very confused about what just happened. And I had to try to make sense of it with my wife, their mom, and so I started this journey to try to understand what actually was going on during the adolescent period. What I found was so were taught from our pediatrician, or what therapists were speaking to each other about. I'm also a child and adolescent psychiatrist, so what my colleagues were saying, or what other parents were saying, or what the media was saying. And in fact, the difference between what all those groups were saying about adolescence and the science of adolescence was so large, that was such a big gap, that it felt to me that someone ought to clarify for adolescents themselves what the truth is about this period. So that's what we're going to talk about. And at first I thought about just writing for adolescents, but then I realized the adults in their lives would probably be really jealous. So then I thought about writing maybe 2 books at once, and I thought that was a little ridiculous. It should be 1 book. So it was really hard to find a voice, actually, to speak directly to adults and adolescents in the same sentence. And so my friends suggested, when they saw how frustrated I was, that I try writing a book where the odd pages was to one age group and the even pages was to the other. So I tried that for a very short amount of time, and it just didn't work. So then I realized that, you know, as our family was going through this period of time, and as I worked as a therapist for families, working with people who are in their adolescent period, that it was possible to have one conversation. So the book was written and then sent out to actually adolescents to read. I got the very scathing feedback about it. So I rewrote it entirely, and then I got feedback again from the adolescents, different set of adolescents, and then I made the 3rd version, which they then gave a stamp of approval for. So I'm going to tell you about the essential aspects of what the science of adolescence says. But as we go through this, if you're an adolescent in the room, I'd like you to think about whether this relates to your experience right now. And for the adults who are past, let's say, age 29 in the room, I want you to think about what that period was like for you. And as we go through it, let me just check it out. For the adults, bless you. In fact, let's have a bless you for everyone who's going to sneeze. Thank you for initiating that. And so for the adults in the room, how many of you care for adolescents directly in your life, either as a parent or a teacher? Raise your hand. So it's pretty much everyone. Is there anyone in the wrong room who thought this was about hiking? Which I think what Terry was trying to tell you is the reason I have these hiking shoes on, I've never given a lecture in hiking shoes, is that after Caroline Welch, my wife and also my boss, my CEO of the Mindsight Institute, where we're going on this lecture tour together, but at the end of it we're taking a week off and we're going to walk the Camino in Spain, and so we needed waterproof shoes. Now you may have heard in California there is no rain, so we have hiking shoes, but none of them are waterproof. So this is my first set of waterproof hiking shoes. I hope you approve. So here you go. I just bought them last night, so I am trying to break them in. In the airplane, they were looking at going like this. So, okay, so let's go through it. First, let me give you just a little teeny bit of a background. You know, I started in high school really interested in biology and how life unfolded. And so when I went to college, I was a biology major, and I was absolutely wildly in love with studying life. And during those years, I had the opportunity in college to actually work in a lab where we were trying to figure out how salmon could go from freshwater to saltwater and not die. So they had to do something to their physiology, and that was really fascinating to look for and ultimately find this enzyme that we think was helping them survive. But at night, I would work on a suicide prevention hotline service. And we were taught that the way you communicate with a person in crisis on the phone could make the difference between whether that person decided to kill themselves or gave them the hope and the feeling that they could continue living. And it was a profound experience as an adolescent to be working that suicide prevention hotline. Not only was it the gravity of, you know, someone could actually kill themselves based on what you did, but it was just the realization that there was something very profound about our relationships with each other. that could give life or take life. And at the same time, I was working in this lab, finding this enzyme where the enzyme, this molecule, could make the difference between whether a fish survived the passage into salt water or not. So I always felt like there must be something in common between enzymes and emotions. And I know that sounds strange, but it really got deep inside of me. So when I was choosing what to do with myself, I thought I would become a physician because I thought that would be a great place to combine emotional communication with understanding enzymes and things like that. And it was so misguided a decision because when I got to medical school, the professors, many of the professors I had in school acted as if human beings were like bags of chemicals. And I'd been a biochemistry major, so I knew about those chemicals. But I knew that we were more than just a bag of chemicals. So if someone were dying, for example, one of my teachers would say to the person who's dying, "We have your lab tests. I'm sorry to say you're dying." And they'd walk away. And I would pull on their white coat and say, "Don't you want to ask them about how they feel?" And they would say, "Why?" Now, if someone asks you why, it's really hard to explain to them why. But everything I've done since that period, 1978, 79, professionally, has been to try to figure out how to tell people who are really smart, like those scientists who are my professors, why talking about emotions is so important. And so I dropped out of school, decided to become, of course, a salmon fisherman. I did, actually, and that's a whole other story. But to get to our point, is that was during my adolescence. And there are features of what I just described in that story of adolescence that are very relevant to what we're about to talk about. So fast forward, I went back to medical school, went to pediatrics after that, decided to move to psychiatry, went through all my training in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry, and then became a researcher studying relationships, called attachment research. And this was now about 1989, and in 1990 was the beginning of what's called the decade of the brain. And so it was really interesting to take a background in biology and my background in neuroscience from medical school and try to apply that to what I was learning as a psychotherapist. So the decade of the brain was a fascinating time to ask the question, how does an attachment relationship shape the brain? And what is the mind in all of that? And that's not what this talk is about, but it's relevant to what this talk is based on, which is from that period, I started working with scientists from all different disciplines, from math to anthropology, and I combined them together into one framework with my colleagues that's called interpersonal neurobiology. So everything you're about to hear comes from this field of interpersonal neurobiology where we don't just take one science, we take all sciences. We look for their common findings, which is called consilience, and then we bring it together into one framework. And so I founded a series of books, and if you're interested, we have now over 36 textbooks that are out published. You can read about this stuff. If you want to start with one science book, it would be The Developing Mind, the second edition. And if you want just an idea book, it would be The Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology. So that's the background. So when my kids were growing up, then all this stuff was coming to be born. So by the time they were teenagers, I was in the middle of all that stuff. And so as they were moving through their teenage years, I took everything I learned from interpersonal neurobiology and read the literature on the science of adolescence and saw that through the lens of interpersonal neurobiology. So now you know where this is all coming from. So I'm going to give you take-home points from now on, and we won't have to worry about the science. But one of my students, for example, from UCLA is here, who's a brand new child psychiatrist to the area, and so I don't know where you are, Renee. This is a long way from what we were teaching back in the day at UCLA when I was the training director there. But it's built on science. So let's start with the first question. In science, you always want to make sure that the words we use have a common understanding. And so the first word we're going to address is the word adolescence, right, with a CE. What is this? What is adolescence? Any thoughts? And is it invented by modern US individuals to designate something? And what's the connotation of adolescence? If someone acts in a certain way, you say, oh, that's being very adolescent of you. What do people mean when they say that in this country? It's immature, right? And people associate the word adolescence with immaturity. In fact, when I was wrestling with the publisher about the subtitle of the book is called Brainstorm, the power and purpose of the teenage brain, I wanted the word adolescence in there, and they said, we shouldn't put it in there, it's an insulting word. And I said, that's the whole point. We want to change the conversation about adolescence, because it is used as a put-down. You're just adolescent. And as you'll see when we walk through this slowly, it's just the opposite. Adolescence, as you'll see, is probably a period of time that is going to save humanity, if we can save it. It'll be from adolescence, and you may say, that's really strange. We're just trying to get them into college. We're going to save the world. I'll show you what the reasoning behind that in just a moment. So, adolescence can be defined as a period of time. The simplest way of saying it, to not get anyone mad, is just say it's a period of time between childhood and adulthood. Isn't that easy? And then you can say, oh, that's really unscientific because maybe there is no period. Why can't you just go from childhood to adulthood? Right? Is there something different about adolescence? And people debate about it. There are some essays written saying, oh, it's all nonsense. There is no such thing as adolescence. It's just childhood and then adulthood. But the fact is, just to leave human beings for a moment and go into other mammals, mammals have a very distinct period between childhood and adulthood. A very distinct period. And mammals have attachment, which is the dependence of a young individual. I used to read guinea pigs and talk about guinea pigs. A young guinea pig on its mom, in this case, it's usually the mother for other mammals, to survive. That's attachment. And childhood relies on that attachment experience, but adolescence is a transition of pushing away from attachment figures. A necessary pushing away. And you see this in most mammalian species. So it's not a human invention. It is a period of time between, if you want to get a little more elaborate, childhood dependency and adult responsibility. Okay, so that's the first thing. We're defining what adolescence is. Now, what are the myths of adolescence that you may have heard about? What is adolescence? Let's start this way. How do you know that your child is now an adolescent? Or how do you know if you yourself have just become an adolescent and you're no longer a child?
Puberty.
What's that?
Puberty.
Puberty, okay. So puberty is sexual maturation. And that isn't exactly the same as adolescence. So you can have people have delayed puberty but still be in adolescence. And you can have people who have early puberty who are not adolescent yet. So they're actually a little separate, but you're absolutely right, they usually go together. So what's puberty? Puberty is a change in the body where you have the ovaries maturing, the testicles maturing. Those are your primary sexual characteristics. And the secondary sexual characteristics you know about. Boys' voice gets lower, starts growing hair. Girls' hips get wider, they start developing breasts. And there are secondary sexual characteristics that go along with puberty. And there are internal sensations, sexual feelings, that start arising and getting intense. And so puberty is associated with all sorts of changes that we usually associate with adolescence. So that's a rough beginning, and it's a good place to start. What else would let you know that your child is entering adolescence?
Pushing boundaries.
Pushing boundaries. Well, my kids push boundaries, I think, from the time they were 2. In different ways, but there's a different style of the boundary pushing, right? It's really outrageous, like, staying out when they should be in, that kind of thing. Absolutely. So you find there's a pushback, and a common pushback, if you're, let's say, I remember with my kids, I love going to the movies with them, and when I said to my son when he was around 13, oh, let's go to the movies, he goes, yeah, let's go, but I'm not going with you. You know, and so I went with his 8-year-old sister, and he went with his friends. And for those of you who read the book Mindsight, you know there's a whole chapter about what happened at the end of that day, called Crepes of Wrath, crepe store. But, okay, so we have this change where there's a pushing back against parents, against parental figures. So that's a change you can see. And as one parent told me, her child would go to the bus, and she'd always go and give her child a hug and a kiss, and it was all beautiful. And then one day he pushed back. He didn't want the kids to the bus seeing his mom kiss him. Right. That's an example of something's changing, and he thinks now it's not okay. So why would it be that adolescents would change like that? And we're going to now start with a little story. So what I want to invite you to do is close your eyes, and I'm just going to tell you a little story, and just let yourself imagine that this is you. And imagine that you're 4 years old, and you've just had a really wonderful deep sleep, and you're in your bed, and the light is slowly beginning to pour through the closed blinds as morning is arriving. And your mom comes into your room and opens your blinds a little bit, lets a little more light in, gives you a kiss on the forehead and says, "Good morning, sweetie." You go, "Good morning, Mom." And she says, "What would you like for breakfast?" And you go, "I think I'll have some oatmeal and some of those walnuts because I'm in Boulder." Or Santa Monica. And she calls downstairs to your dad or your mom, or in LA it will be your mom also, your second mom. But whatever, your other parent, co-parent, and says, "She'd like some oatmeal with some walnuts." And then he says, "No problem, I'll cook it up." And then you start smelling the oatmeal cooking, and you get out of your pajamas, you go to the bathroom, you brush your teeth, you wash your face, you put on your clothes for preschool, you go downstairs, now you're eating your oatmeal and your walnuts, and you realize there's enough time to watch a cartoon. So you ask if you can watch a cartoon. They say, "Of course, Minnie, you can watch a cartoon." So you're watching your cartoon, you have a real fun time doing that. They put you in the car, they take you to school, you learn to play with your friends, share your toys, draw, play with blocks, you take a little rest, you play some more, you sing some songs, and then it's time to get picked up at noon, and your dad picks you up, drives you back home, gives you whatever lunch you want. You then take a nap, and then he puts on some music when you wake up, and you dance around the house, you go outside, you play with your dogs, you come in, you watch some more cartoons. They then make dinner for you. You watch dinner and you realize you have enough time for another cartoon. So you watch another cartoon, and now when you're getting a little sleepy, they bring you back upstairs, you brush your teeth, they give you a bath, they scrub you down, bring you to your room, and put on your pajamas. You then get in bed, they give you a massage, sing you a song, and they tell your story, and you go off to sleep. And that was your day. Now, as you probably know, as we get sexually mature, we need to leave home and go out in the world and find people not genetically related to us to hang out with. It's just the truth. So what is nature going to do to your brain to make you want to leave that oatmeal house? Who in their sane mind would ever leave that? I know a lot of spouses who are trying to get it back. Right? So, nature is brilliant. And nature decides that he, she, nature, it, whatever nature is going to be called, nature figures out a way to take this child's brain and not just keep it growing, because from birth onward during childhood, let's just call it the first dozen years of life, the brain is accumulating more and more connections among its basic cells, the neurons. And it gets bigger and bigger. It's based on genetic information and based on experiences. That's That's what learning is. So you develop more and more what we call synaptic connections. And the brain gets more and more intricate in the first year of life, the second year of life, third year of life, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. The kid is like a sponge, soaking in everything she can. And as you know, in elementary school, we expect kids to just be generalists, good at everything, to love everything, which is cool because their brain is ready to do that. But what nature does with adolescents is get this kid to want to leave the oatmeal house. Now, how would you do it? How would you do it? So, what we're going to do is look at how that actually happens. Remembering that some of the common myths that you hear about are actually misplaced and sometimes just plain out wrong, and sometimes even destructive. So, as we go through what actually happens in the brain in just a moment, let's compare it to the common myths. So, puberty is one thing that people refer to, and so what they say that the reason adolescents act in such unusual ways is because of what? Raging hormones, exactly. Now, because of puberty, it is true, hormones rise. But I can tell you, in medical school, I've never heard of a class of hormones called raging hormones. You know, unless there's some kind of category where there's anger management programs for specific hormones that they don't know how to control their rage. So raging hormones is common around this whole planet. I don't know who invented that phrase, but it's not only wrong, but it's really destructive. Now, why is it destructive? It's destructive, as you'll see, because if I were to tell you right now in your seat, hey, guess what? You got these little molecules floating around your body that are raging out of control, and they're going to make you act absolutely outrageous. What would you do about it? You'd feel really bad, wouldn't you? Or badly. Feel bad or bad? Anyway, you'd feel pretty rotten, right? So, this is a disempowering myth that leads to no improvement on anyone's part. It doesn't lead to improvement on the adolescent's part, it doesn't lead to improvement on the adult's part, and it doesn't lead to improvement in their relationship. And yet everybody believes it, and it's wrong. It's flat out wrong. What's the second myth about adolescence? We already said it. It's a period of immaturity. Well, actually, it's not a period of immaturity. Immaturity defined as, I'm just in a period waiting to become something else. Let's just define immaturity that way. It's not. It's a necessary period, as you'll see, of brain remodeling. It's not just a waiting period, so we should do what the third myth is. Adolescence is so bad, you should just hurry up and get over it. Right? In fact, it's just the opposite, as you'll see. Research shows the longer you can extend your adolescence, the healthier your brain's going to be. And that's just not my opinion. Look at the wonderful work of Lawrence Steinberg, who actually writes that exact thing in his last book, The Age of Opportunity. Okay, so it's not raging hormones. It's not a period of immaturity that we just need to hurry up and get over. And another myth that people say is, well, the reason adolescents do such dangerous things is because they have an immature prefrontal cortex. You've probably heard that. And that's not exactly true. There are things changing a lot, including the prefrontal cortex, but it's really the whole brain is changing, not just this one area of the brain. And the risk-taking, in part, is due to impulsivity, due to this immature prefrontal inhibition, but actually risk-taking behavior continues long after that feature of the brain is no longer present. So risk-taking is something else is going on, in addition to that initial difficulty controlling an impulse. Okay, so those are some of the myths. And the reason it's important to debunk those myths, if you're an adolescent listening to this, is that what I'm about to tell you, as people have seen, having read the Brainstorm book, can transform your life. Because the truths are actually something you can do something about. And when you're given the knowledge and the skills to understand what's going on in your brain as an adolescent, it actually changes your whole experience of adolescence. So in the paperback version of the book, which is coming out soon, I'm putting these quotes of all these adolescents who sent us emails after they read the book. They are the most moving statements I've ever gotten as a writer about, you write, it's a lonely thing, you write, and you put it out there. If you don't hear from anyone, you have no idea if it impacts anybody. But these adolescents have written these notes. They're just absolutely inspiring what they say. So let's go through the essence of this remodeling period, realizing that everything we're about to talk about the essence of adolescence is something that you can help your adolescent do, or they can help themselves do, because the book is written for them to read or you to read. And the other thing is, as you go through it, I'd like you to remember your own adolescence if you're an adult. And think about these 4 aspects of development. And luckily, well, it isn't luckily that I have this problem, but I have a problem that luckily gives rise to an issue, which the issue is acronyms. My problem is I'm an acronym addict. I love acronyms, and I kind of think in terms of acronyms. So here's the acronym that we're going to have the rest of the talk based on. It's the essence of adolescence, so it's the word essence. So if you're taking notes, it'll be 4 things. ES, SE, N, and CE. So let's go through each of those 4 things. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to think about the myths, think about the oatmeal house and the reasons for adolescence, and then look at the downsides and the upsides of each of these 4 features. And as we look at that, we're going to think about also how can you as an adult support the adolescent in your life, making the most of their essence and actually enjoying their essence versus being very